Hi everyone, this is Dr. Tanya Pobeda, and this is the Precarity Podcast. This podcast is, you guessed it, all about precarity. Precarity in the workplace, precarity in housing, precarious access to food, precarity in public spaces due to the ongoing pandemic, and the precarity we're all facing now because of the existential threat of climate change. I bring a unique perspective to these questions. I have a PhD now, and I decided to get one late in life because I was really frustrated by what I saw happening in workplaces. So this is the true story time. I have a 28-year career in life sciences, tech, and now higher education. I also grew up in a trailer in the far north in a low-income rural community. I was a single mom living in low-income housing. I've struggled with bullying and abuse in the workplace. I've battled with exploitative landlords, and I've experienced being broke with nowhere to turn. I've lived in buildings that have had their water and power cut off for days. Despite my limited economic means, the absence of workplace ethics in some workplaces has never stopped worrying me. Early in my career, I decided I'd rather walk away from a payday than participate in fraud, exploitation, or corruption. Apparently, I'm quite strange like that. In tech, as a performance analyst, I was asked to falsify the data for a large lead generation event led by a US-based team. The event cost a fortune, but was very poorly attended. Shockingly, it had cost $96,000 per attendee. That number remains seared in my mind for all time. I was ordered by my boss to, quote, find better numbers, unquote, while I tried and tried to falsify this awful finding. This was $96,000, the bitter and inescapable truth. My boss's solution to this problem: my analyses was removed from the formal report and disappeared. I left this particular role months later. This wasn't the first time I was ordered to fudge data to fit a preferred narrative. In the consumer services sector, I was alerted to a false advertising issue that was harming our most vulnerable clients. This was my dream job. I investigated and found that the customer complaints were 100% true. So I got to work and designed a replacement program. When I presented the matter and its solution to my boss, I was ordered to stop talking about it whatsoever. I was never to mention it again. This particular program had been in place for years before I started, and according to him, this really unethical program worked, quote unquote, and brought in significant dollars, fraud or no. I left that job a few months later because I couldn't conscience doing that to customers. But on the way out, I delivered everything to my executive team and members of the board. It could not be allowed to stand. And then in the education sector, where I was least suspecting these issues would crop up, I was asked to create a learning object that collected mental health information about students, including whether or not a student was feeling suicidal. And no, this was not a mental health course. When I was asked to do this, I felt sick to my stomach. And I explained to the professor this was not something an industry standard instructional design tool could or should ever do, and I certainly wouldn't do it. I had to resign from this client weeks later. This wasn't the first horrific thing he said, and I know in my heart I will never compromise student privacy or safety for any price, no matter what. As the quote goes, ethics is about knowing the difference between knowing what you have a right to do and what is right to do. And that's a quote from Potter Stewart. I always intuitively knew that if you're really only as ethical as the company you keep. And that is the most important thing to remember. If you join an unethical group or an unethical organization, you'll simply be the most ethical person of the criminals you work alongside with. If you work for those unscrupulous, unethical people, then every day you're going to be in a pitch battle to preserve your integrity and your human decency. And in some work cultures, my leadership teams loved my honest takes and my ethical compass. I would bring a perspective of working class people to those boardrooms, and I was never shy about sharing my perspectives. In these cultures, leaders didn't want to be surrounded by normless, homogenous, monocultural, and unprincipled sycophants who told those leaders what they wanted to hear. In other work cultures, my best and only move was to walk away. I know what kind of workplace culture I prefer. What do you think? Now, the coda here is, well, I'll encourage you all to normalize walking away from unethical organizations like I did. I know most of us can't, and I was a single mom in every single case that I share here. Most institutions and organizations seem to privilege the unethical and lawless maverick who quote-unquote breaks things over the ethical and steady worker. I know the moral injuries we all face every day in face of that reality. You're probably sitting in a workplace right now where the loud-talking, brash maverick is getting all the kudos and you're plodding away doing the right thing every single day and not getting recognition. I know that feeling. Unfortunately, we're all living in an era with those who have no shame, ethics, decency, can get very rich indeed. Very, very rich. Income inequalities are stark and worsening by the day. 1 in 7 Canadians live in poverty. Most of us are only a few missed months of work away from homelessness and complete financial collapse. In this, we're living through another Gilded Age. Just as we saw in the late 19th century, we have new robber barons cast in the same mold as Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and John D. Rockefeller. There are no dirty tricks that these kinds of unscrupulous industrialists and moneyed interests won't attempt. That includes running disinformation campaigns about working class people like us on social media in an attempt to convince us to act against our own self-interest. And we can literally see this pattern in the for-profit climate change, pandemic deniers who are literally running rampant throughout our society. Author Brian Klaus talks about the potent allure of power and money and this lack of ethics in workplaces and beyond. How it's always those with dark triad traits of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and sociopathy or psychopathy who will exploit circumstances, particularly during times of upheaval, to enrich themselves. Klaus talks about the fact that there are always those willing to lie, cheat, and steal to support the interests of the powerful in his excellent book, Corruptible. In times like we are all living through, you don't have to be smart, good, accomplished, educated, or talented to rake in money or attain success. You see this every day. You simply need to be shameless to harden your heart to those around you and be willing to lie to support your wealthy benefactors. Folks with dark triad traits are all winning right now. And that's, of course, the allure of authoritarianism. To succeed, you only need to be loyal to those in power or agree with the strongman leader and do their will unquestionably at no matter the cost. Are you living through an unethical workplace right now? I have had extensive experience with this. My solution was to walk away. I want to know what you think. Write me a comment or share this podcast with others. I would love to hear from you. And thanks so much for listening.